The first-person shooter genre has been around ever since the 70s and 80s with games like Maze War and Battlezone. While they were shooting games that the player would play using a first-person perspective, the first true FPS was created in the early 90s with Wolfenstein 3D. Dubbed the grandfather of first-person shooters, Wolfenstein helped lay the foundation of what the FPS genre would be moving forward. However, the company behind Wolfenstein 3D, id Software, were looking towards greener pastures, and in 1993 they unleashed Doom to the world. Doom took Wolfenstein's basic shooting mechanics and ran with it, and with that, it created something truly special. Nazi soldiers were replaced with demons from hell. The World War II backdrop was abolished in place of an entirely original story involving failed scientific experiments and a lone space marine trying to survive the demon horde. Instead of 4 weapons, Doom had 7. Instead of only a couple of enemy variants, Doom had several types of demons that the player had to deal with. Instead of the basic level infrastructure that Wolfenstein 3D presented, Doom's map layouts featured unseen before verticality, elaborate traps and monster closets, new ways of triggering specific cues, and this in turn provided the developers with more ways to engage the player. id Software told Computer Gaming World that the game would be Wolfenstein times a million, and they were spot on with that line. Doom's legacy and impact on the gaming landscape can still be felt to this day, with many people stating that even all of these years later, that it's the best first-person shooter game of all time. And I'm one of them. This is the genius of Doom. Now, I fucking love the Doom franchise, but throughout this 10-part retrospective I'm planning on doing, I will also be critical of each game. This project will contain a lot of gushing and praise for Doom, because I am a super fan, but I will also critique some parts of the Doom games later on, but again, that's just a byproduct of me loving the games to death. Anyway, I briefly covered the several technical innovations that spawned from Doom that Wolfenstein ultimately lacked. What makes Doom a genius game though, and why is it so replayable? Some fans might turn to the modding community and the sheer amount of support they gave Doom over the years. I mean, there's custom mod files, different mods and texture packs to play with, and more. The Doom modding community has been incredible for the longest time, but I don't believe that this is the driving factor as to why the gameplay has an everlasting quality to it. The original Doom is simple. The gunplay, the key collecting, and everything in between is rather simple, and that's what makes it timeless. Some would argue that the gameplay in Doom is too simplistic, but I think that 1. There is a bit more nuance to the weapon's functionality and meta than you may think, and 2. The rather straightforward shooting mechanics is the game's greatest asset. I will elaborate on point number 1 in a later video, so let's focus on why the gameplay can be quite varied for new players and veterans. If a newcomer plays Doom for the first time, they will most likely not hold shift to run and stick to the average walking speed, which is slow as fuck. They might peek behind cover to avoid the several hit-scan enemies all over E1M1, and they'll probably also eat some imp fireballs. While I believe the game was obviously more intended to be played at a faster pace, with the player running and strafing around, the game isn't built solely upon speedy combat. Doom is much more simple than that, and due to its simplicity, it opens up many ways to play the game. With the Plutonia experiment, which is one of the megawads bundled in Final Doom, taking your time is basically a requirement in some sections, and the game punishes you for acting too cocky and flying ahead. Going back to the original Doom, you can go through each level carefully by peeking behind cover, staying cautious, savouring health pickups, and play it more like an action horror game. I mean, there are many monster closets in Doom where the lights would dim and you would be trapped trapped in a room with demons to deal with in the dark. That closet would be much more frightening when you are already taking it slow and not running through the level. Doom's combat is simple, so it can be played in a number of different styles. The very casual Doom player would pace themselves before blasting ahead through a level, while the more veteran players have auto-run enabled, are strafing left and right, and all of a sudden it becomes an entirely new experience. You feel like a badass when you're dancing through imp and cacodemon fireballs, when you blow up an entire room of monsters within seconds using a rocket launcher, when you breeze through a mission in a matter of seconds, etc. All of these feel very rewarding, and it's very enjoyable blasting through Doom levels at a breakneck pace. So there are two combat styles in Doom that the player can play around with. Both of them offer up a unique experience, and that's what makes Doom genius. When people design maps for classic Doom, they can create a map either around making the player take their time, or making them blow through a level. I love that, and the seemingly primitive nature of Doom's gunplay makes it so that modders and map designers can get even more creative with how they structure their levels. I do find it fascinating how id Software has varied up their properties over the years. Of course, the shining example of an id franchise having an identity crisis is with Quake, but Doom was in a similar boat for a bit. Regardless, the original Doom accommodates all types of players with its gameplay, and I think that's part of the reason why the question, what is Doom, can be answered differently depending on the person. Doom is a horror game. Kinda. If you played Doom back in the 90s as a kid, and your memories of it consist of the stretched out demonic faces and how scary the lighting was, then yeah, it's no wonder why you came to that conclusion. Doom is a power fantasy. Kinda. If you watch an expert Doom player breeze through each stage as they're weapon switching, strafing around fireballs, and doing all of these badass activities, then yes, you will no doubt believe that the game is trying to be one. Doom is a puzzle game. Kinda. Of course, there's two ways to think about that last comment. You can either consider Doom a combat puzzle or a maze puzzle, and both are legitimate. There are points where the player feels like a rat in a maze trying to find the exit switch, and there are most certainly combat encounters that you need to prepare for and think about which weapon to use. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. Over the years, Doom has been labelled as many things by different people, and the brilliance of it all is, they're all kinda right. After Doom 1 and 2, there was Final Doom, that consisted of TNT Evolution and the formerly mentioned Plutonia experiment. While both TNT and Plutonia were just Doom 2 megawads, most of their maps are still worth playing. With Plutonia specifically, I usually try to take my time with it and act cautiously around keycards and important items, because you'll just know there'll be a trap after you collect them. Also, in the first level for example, ammo is scarce, so it's important to make every shot count. You really need to take your time to plan out your attack in that case, and that's what I'm saying. Doom can promote different types of play, depending on the map and player of course. As we fast forward to 2004, id Software released Doom 3 to a mixed reception. Some people loved the game and other people thought that it leaned too much into survival horror, which is one term I disagree with in association with Doom 3. This game is not necessarily survival horror, but more so a horror action game or a first-person shooter with horror elements. Either way, Doom 3 did rely on more slow-paced gameplay than its predecessors, but the original Doom can be just as slow-paced. I've seen many people play Doom like an action horror game, as they creep around walls and snipe enemies from afar. Doom 1 and its surrounding WODs are special because of the different styles of play it can serve up. Even going back to the Ultimate Doom, in Episode 4 Mission 1, you have to peek around cover when the shotgunners are coming after you. That's mostly because you don't have any armor or additional health, and that first level of thy flesh consumed can fuck you up if you don't manage your resources properly. Doom 3 offers a kind of similar experience as it's much more slow paced, But on the other side of the coin, Doom 64 was released as a new entry in the Doom franchise, but everyone for the longest time just thought it was an N64 port of the original game. In reality, Doom 64 is a brand new take on the Doom formula, and instead of the monsters being the ultimate threat to the player, it was the maps themselves. Doom has had environmental hazards before, but Doom 64's levels felt like they were out to personally get at you and trip you up. The game just had a tendency to fuck with you by providing more stage obstacles than previous Doom games. I mean, early on, there's a puzzle where you have to reach the blue key, and when you try and collect it, the key just moves spots. Things like that would annoy me in a good way, and it made me want to figure out what the puzzle was for each level and how to avoid the constant environmental dangers. Doom 64 is one of those games you either love or hate, and I'm in the camp of people who simply enjoy it for what it is. When id Software rebooted the Doom franchise with Doom 2016, the developers hinged on creating a fast push-forward combat loop in the game. They created arenas where the player would run around and fuck up demons, and I believe they mostly nailed the Doom experience. An issue I did have with the reboot that they did rectify in Doom Eternal was the lack of enemy contact outside of the main arenas. I hope id Software continues to add more things like this, where enemies are placed in non-arena zones. It helps freshen up the gameplay, and it gives the player some choice on how to handle the demons. Speaking of Doom Eternal, I did want to mention some of the genius aspects of that game, especially when it comes to the weapons and how they can be used. I've seen many people experiment in Doom Eternal with various gun combinations, and it's mind-blowing to see how effective some methods are. People have found creative ways to chain certain gun attacks together to dispose of enemies quickly, or in general just to play more efficiently. To name one example, I used to think that the microwave mod for the plasma rifle was kinda useless. Yes, you can use it to zap demons and make them explode, but I never found a great place to use the mod and opted for the heat blast instead, until I found this video. Under the Mayo is creating fantastic Doom Eternal videos, and he previously made one on a great method on using the microwave beam. Instead of standing in one spot trying to charge up the microwave beam so that the demon will explode, you can use it more as a stun lock device to give yourself a breather in combat. The way that Doom Eternal allows the player to mix and match different weapon combinations and find your own ways of making each gun mod work for your playstyle is amazing, and I hope this concept gets expanded upon in later Doom entries. It's simply fantastic. By the way, I'm aware that this video was initially about the genius of the original Doom, and hopefully I've explained why the simple combat has made the game timeless, but I also wanted to praise what id's doing with the property today. When the id Software team made Doom back in the 90s, it felt like the game was being created by passionate guys who just loved pop culture, and that spirit has been carried on with id today. People like Marty Stratton and Hugo Martin are single-handedly keeping the attitude of id Software alive, as they seem like huge pop culture nerds, and pop culture is directly fueling these new Doom games. Just like how the Cacodemon was ripped straight from this Dungeons & Dragons manual for the original game, they literally have collectible action figures in Doom Eternal. I love how the Doom franchise is inherently inspired by pop culture, and that's still going on today. Doom is an interesting beast, because while it can be scary and atmospheric, it also has a sense of humor about itself. Nothing is taken overly seriously, and even in Doom 3, there's an arcade machine called Super Turkey Puncher for fuck's sake. Now that I've given a not-so-brief overview of the Doom series, while also examining what makes classic Doom's gameplay so special to me, I wanted to switch gears and discuss the most subjective aspect about the original game: its level design. Every Doom fan has an opinion on what makes a good level. Every fan has a preference and a disdain for certain maps, and there's been so much discussion online about the best and worst maps in the classic Doom franchise. For me, Doom 1 is my favourite game in the series. I think it has the most consistent level design, and I really want to dissect each of its maps. Doom's first episode, titled Knee Deep in the Dead, is probably the most important set of maps in the first first-person shooter genre. These 9 levels made up the shareware release of Doom, and what can I really say about them that hasn't already been said? Doom's very first level is one of the most iconic maps in any game, and for good reason. E1M1 Hangar was designed by John Romero, as was most of Knee Deep in the Dead, and it was actually the last map to be created. Romero has explained that all of Doom's designers got naturally better at map making as they went on with development, and he wanted the first level to be the best, so that's why it was made last. And if you, yourself, picked Hangar as the greatest level in the game, I definitely can't disagree. Hangar follows a simple horseshoe design where the level loops around, and it also follows each one of John Romero's design principles. For instance, Romero likes to have outside areas in his maps, but he makes sure that everything you can see through a window you can access, and that is hinted in E1M1 by the Mega Armor sitting in the toxic pool. On Ultra-Violence, you can access the shotgun in the first few seconds thanks to these zombies, and then you can just blow through the rest of the map. Good stuff. E1M1 is brilliant, you all know that, and it's been talked about to death. So let's go on to the other levels in episode 1. Knee Deep in the Dead is probably the most perfect episode in any 90s first-person shooter game. The only level that I can actually criticize is E1M8, Phobos Anomaly, and that's only because on higher difficulties, the most challenging part about the map is the Pinky Demons getting in your way instead of the Barons of Hell. Also, I think this star shape is kinda weird, and while it's not a terrible boss map, it's certainly very iconic, it's not fantastic either. Apart from E1M8, Episode 1 is pitch perfect, and the level designs are super consistent. E1M2 opens things up a bit and introduces the red key to the player. I love how you're immediately faced with options with how to maneuver through the stage. You can take the lifts up first to grab the health and ammo, you can check out and collect the green armor first, or you can go up these stairs in order to grab the red key. Here you can see John Romero's obsession again with adding windows to look at the outside area so that you can wonder how the fuck you're getting out there when you first play. E1M3 is another classic, especially with the part where you grab the blue key, the room turns almost pitch black, and you hear a closet full of imps open up. Or when the Pinky Demons make their first appearance in this level, and they make their presence known from the jump by rushing towards the player. There are so many great novelties and set pieces in this episode, and the more and more I play Knee Deep in the Dead, the more I appreciate the little details and what makes it so perfect. My personal favourite levels in episode 1 include Central Processing, Phobos Lab, and Command Control, but in all honesty, they are all brilliantly designed. The pacing of Knee Deep in the Dead has got to be mentioned as well, since if you take one out of these 9 maps out, the synergy between each of them falls apart. As Doom continues with episodes 2 and 3, the maps get a bit more spotty, but they are still mostly a joy to play. From E2M1, Deimos Anomaly, to E2M5, Command Center, the level design remains solid and they start to incorporate more demonic imagery. In episode 1, the Hell architecture was only presented to you in secret areas, which I think was a very cool idea and it makes exploring even more rewarding. But then, episode 2 blows the doors open and greets you with an upside down cross in the first level. I know that E2M2 containment area gets a lot of shit, but I never really found it to be that confusing or frustrating to figure out where to go. My issues with episode 2 only lie with E2M6, Halls of the Damned, E2M7, Spawning Vat, and how can we forget, the worst secret map in any Doom game, E2M9, Fortress of Mystery. E2M6 can be a pain in the arse with the dark sections, but at the same time, I love the fake exit switch. Even though I'm not a huge fan of Halls of the Damned, I can still admit that the fake exit is ingenious. E2M7 looks a little rough around the edges, and I believe that's due to how long this map was in development. If I recall correctly, E2M7, Spawning Vats, was one of the first levels to be designed, and it was worked on since Doom's alpha stage. So with that said, it's no wonder why it doesn't seem quite as appealing as the others. Whenever you come across a demonic room in Spawning Vats, it looks very nice and fun to go through, but the same can't be said for these blue tech base areas that I'm not really a fan of. Unfortunately, the secret map of episode 2, Fortress of Mystery, is one of my lesser favourite Doom maps. However, it was the first ever map designed with infighting in mind, so I do have to pay it a lot of respect. In fact, the map's designer, Sandy Peterson, should be highly praised for his efforts working on Doom 1 and 2, but I'll discuss that more in depth in a later video. The general idea of E2M9 is that you're supposed to be like, how the fuck am I going to kill all of these barons and cacodemons? And then you just let them infight to solve the problem. This idea works in theory, but up to this point in episode 2, you're already equipped with plenty of ammo and guns to take care of everyone. If Fortress of Mystery was accessed through E2M1, that would have made much more sense with infighting being the intended solution, and also the benefit for finishing the secret level would have been a lot greater, since you would enter E2M2 with every gun but the BFG. You'll be fully equipped at that point to deal with the challenges ahead, but with the way that E2M9 is found in E2M5, I find Fortress of Mystery to be quite perplexing, but I guess that fits the map name. At least E2M8 makes up for it with the first Cyberdemon encounter in Doom history. I love the dead barons on the walls, and this is a great, simple arena. It taking actual religious concepts like the Tower of Babel and shoving them into Doom is also really cool to see, and of course how can you forget the intermission screens, how you see the tower being built over time. If you do have some plasma left over, just use that to kill the Cyberdemon. Don't bother with the rocket launcher duel with all of them lost souls around. And that concludes episode 2. Although The Shores of Hell is pretty damn good, I think I prefer episode 3, Inferno, more, just because they fully embrace the hell aesthetic. If I had to think more objectively though, they are probably on par with one another. Either way, E3M1 Hell's Keep is fucking awesome, and it's the perfect entry into Hell. I mean, you start out by touching a switch in the shape of an eye. Now that is demonic. The rest of the level is surprisingly tight with ammo, and I definitely recommend getting all of its secrets to have an easier time with E3M2, Slough of Despair. Now I've seen a ton of people shit all over Slough of Despair, and while it isn't groundbreaking compared to the other Hell levels in the game, I think it's still decent enough. The most common criticism of E3M2 is that it's too tight, too closed in, and it's a little tough to maneuver through, but to me, that's a part of its charm. We're in episode 3, located in Hell, and I feel like some levels should be daunting and claustrophobic in parts. We're on the monster's turf, and the player is on foreign soil. So yeah, making a map like Slough of Despair works in that sense, but only once in a while. Again, I'm not trying to claim it's the most well-designed level in the world, but I think it gets way too much of a bashing. E3M3 Pandemonium is up next, and it's another fine level, along with E3M4 House of Pain. E3M3 is where the player can obtain the BFG, and I kinda like how it's just sitting in this corner chilling, not bringing any attention to itself. As for House of Pain, I know that a common complaint with this map is this damaging floor with a line of health pickups to compensate, and even though it is kinda dumb, it's also not that offensive to me. House of Pain has much more awesome set pieces and interesting rooms than it has floors. I mean, just take this room with the weird tentacles and pillars, or the next room over with the red ceilings and blood-leaking mouths as evidence. Inferno is a rather strong episode until we get up to E3M5, Unholy Cathedral. This level can just fuck off with its teleport heavy bullshit. It's been a decade since I started playing Doom and I still can't be asked figuring out exactly which teleporter goes where. I know where the blue key is, so I get that and rush to the exit. It's a shame because Unholy Cathedral contrasts heavily with E3M6, Mount Erebus, which is my all-time favourite map in the game. The open-ended level design, the island-based approach, the brilliant enemy placement, placement, the texture and building layouts, everything about this map is fantastic. If I had to pick one issue with Mount Erebus, I would say that for first time players, it might be a little confusing on where to go after collecting the blue key, but that's my only real complaint. Throughout the course of episode 3, you're picking up rocket launcher ammo and you don't have many open spaces to fully use it. That is, until Mount Erebus. Now you can finally let those rockets go, and it feels nice to be in a wide outdoor arena blasting everything with your gun. If you take the secret exit to E3M9, Warrens, you will find yourself in a remixed version of E3M1, and this is undoubtedly the best secret map in the game. The way that the level initially tricks you and how it might almost piss you off that you're back at E3M1 is amazing, and while it is a novel idea, it is still a very fun level to play. Limbo is the penultimate level of the original game, and it's fine. It might be very annoying for first time Doom players due to the massive key hunt, and I'd imagine that was the intention, but Limbo is still a bit disappointing as the second to final map. I wish E3M7 was an extension of Mount Erebus and we just explored more hellish islands and cityscapes, instead of being trapped indoors doing switch and teleport puzzles. On its own though, Limbo is just okay, and even if it is kind of a letdown, I don't dislike it as much as some people might. That being said, Limbo doesn't hold a candle to being the most disappointing Doom level compared to E3M8. Dis. Here is the final boss of the entire game, and you can destroy it in 2 to 3 quick BFG shots. There's no build up to the Spider Mastermind, there's only a couple of demons to cut down besides it, and this level puts a bad taste in your mouth. Doom begins excellent and ends poorly, but at least we have Thy Flesh Consumed to make up for it. Hell Beneath was created by American McGee, and this is touted as one of the hardest levels in Doom history. This map can be punishing, and I absolutely love it. The way that you have to peek around corners, as I've said, to pick off his shotgunners in the beginning is great, and the limited health pickups makes this an even more challenging map. There's only a few health vials in this entire level, so you better not waste them. I know that many players have trouble with the teleporting enemies when going inside the red key room, but to lessen some of the difficulty, I usually hug this wall before going inside to trigger most of the monsters out, and then kill them from this area instead of the tight interior. At least when you're fighting them from the outside, you have more room to maneuver, and it makes things a little easier. I've heard that people also have trouble with the monsters and how they constantly teleport to a different location, making them hard to kill. Well, the teleport destinations are marked with the pools of blood on the ground, so that should help with determining where they will disappear to next. Even with those tricks, Hell Beneath is still a tough fucking level, but I find it so enjoyable to play, and it's one of the best maps that Thy Flesh Consumed has to offer. E4M2, Perfect Hatred, is another iconic Doom map, and it's another one that can be insanely difficult. Designed by John Romero in 6 hours, this might be my personal favourite episode 4 level. Even though it might be overwhelming, there are a ton of shortcuts and little tricks to help you get past it. For starters, when you raise this platform up, immediately dash towards it and you will end up on top of it. Then you rush to the plasma rifle and fuck up the Baron guarding it at point blank range. This makes it much easier to handle the group of Barons on the other side of the room, as you have more space to maneuver and more plasma ammo to use. Another important tip is to perform the BFG grab when you're in the secret area. In order to get this BFG the normal way, you need to telefrag the Cyber Demon, and that's only an option when you're basically done with the level. So yeah, my advice is to get the BFG early and use it on whatever you need to get by. The difficulty of the map aside, I think the architecture and the way that lava surrounds the entire stage looks great. It reminds me of Sigil, which also has rather complicated levels. I cannot believe that Romero designed this in only 6 hours. It seems too intricate for that to be the case, but either way, E4M2 is near perfection. Thy Flesh Consumed softens up when you get to E4M3, Sever the Wicked, and although the maps going forward are not as iconic as Hell Beneath, or Perfect Hatred, they are still quality levels in their own rights. I love the orange coloured skybox and wooden texture combo, and there are just hordes of fucking monsters in this map. It feels so good mowing down a large group of hit-scanning enemies with rockets, the plasma rifle, or the chain gun, whatever. Like I said before, this level might seem like a departure from the first two levels in episode 4, but as a standalone thing, it works quite well and is nicely designed. E4M4 might be the easiest map of Thy Flesh Consumed, and while it's not bad at all, it is a little inconsistent from the first 3 levels with its difficulty. The episode goes from brutal, then more brutal, then it gets a little easier, then the difficulty plummets and becomes a cakewalk with E4M4 and even E4M5. Speaking of which, E4M5, They Will Repent, is probably the weakest entry in the episode. I think it looks kinda bland compared to the rest of Thy Flesh Consumed, and it's one level I try to finish as quickly as possible to get to E4M6, Against the Wickedly. E4M6 shares many similarities with Perfect Hatred, as they are both intricate with many obstacles and steps to finish them. Oh, and the Cyber Demon makes a return as well, and he's much tougher than an E4M2. I usually try to take him down in the lava below using a radiation suit, rather than trying to blast him at point blank range. E4M7, And Hell Followed, is the penultimate map of the episode. Rest in peace, John Anderson. I'll be talking more about this guy later on when I cover the Doom 2 Master levels, but nevertheless, he was an extremely talented mapmaker, and E4M7 is no exception to this. Tight action pieces, a rather small, compact design, very solid monster placement, and no real complaints from me about E4M7. The final level of Thy Flesh Consumed is pretty damn good, and it makes up for episode 3's lackluster conclusion. There is some great build-up with an army of hit scanners to lay waste to, a group of barons to take care of, and plenty of plasma/BFG ammo to do it with. Even though the actual Spider Mastermind encounter is nothing too special, the map built him up appropriately and gave you ample weaponry and power-ups to take him out. Those were pretty much all of the levels I wanted to talk about in the Ultimate Doom, and I love most of them. Doom 1 is my favourite game in the franchise, and I think there are only 2 maps that I can say are downright bad. The original Doom has an extremely consistent map set, and blew the doors off for first-person shooter games to follow. From the combat mechanics and the technical leaps it had over Wolfenstein 3D, to its excellent sense of humour, blending of sci-fi and horror, and the superb level design, these are all of the traits that make up the genius of Doom.